Welcome to Donnelly College's first Common Read event of the semester. Each semester, Donnelly College selects a book which the whole community, that is students, faculty, staff, and supporters of the college, read together in order to have common conversations and themes for the school year. This year, our common read is Your Life is a Story, G.K. Chesterton and the Paradox of Freedom by Brady Stiller. Next semester, we will have Mr. Stiller on campus for a conversation about his book in Chesterton. For now, unfortunately, we only have the man who wrote the foreword to the book with us. Dale Ahlquist is president of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton. He is the creator and host of the EWTN series, The Apostle of Common Sense, a program which centered on Chesterton. He's the author of 8 books, many of which are on the back table for purchase after the talk, the editor of 16 more books, and the publisher of Gilbert magazine. Chesterton biographer Joseph Pierce has called Dale probably the greatest living authority on the life and work of G.K. Chesterton. Dale has given more than 900 lectures at universities, conferences, and other institutions, including Yale, Columbia, Cornell, Notre Dame, Oxford, the Vatican Forum in Rome, and the House of Lords in London. He is the co-founder of the first Chesterton Academy, a classical Catholic high school in Hopkins, Minnesota, which gave birth to a growing Chesterton Schools network that now includes over 70 schools in the U.S., including our own local Kansas City, Missouri Chesterton Academy, who so graciously helped sponsor this event, and as well as in 9 other countries that have Chesterton Academy. Please welcome Dale Ahlquist.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. It's good to see that you were not stopped by the rain. You were the only serious people here on campus. Everyone else, obviously, said, I'm not going, it's too rainy. So it's good to have you. And I'm glad I can now add Donnelly College to my resume. So you're going to be reading this book for the Common Read. And what I'm going to do is not talk about the book at all. All right? I will probably mention a little bit, but I'm here really to introduce you to G.K. Chesterton, which will hopefully give you an enthusiasm for the book that you're going to be reading. This is a fine book. It's short. It's condensed. Every sentence will drip with significance, and that's a good thing. You understand that Brady Stiller wrote this basically as his senior thesis at Notre Dame University, and it just expanded into a book. And he represents the sort of thinker. He represents the sort of complete thinker that G.K. Chesterton is. What we do with our Chesterton Academies, the schools that we have helped get started around the country, is try to teach students an integrated way of thinking. A lot of the problems with our modern education is that each subject is taught so completely in its own department or own silo that students are not able to make good connections from one subject to the next. And if someone gets interested in science, that's really all they end up studying. And you know, they could become very good at their discipline, but they're also kind of narrow in their thinking. And the idea is that you have to study the sciences and the humanities and the arts to be a more complete thinker. And it will help you understand the discipline in which you are specializing by understanding the disciplines that you're not specializing in. Now, Brady Stiller was a double major in biology and theology. And that kind of represents, you know, how he's putting everything together. So, G.K. Chesterton. I accidentally became an expert on Chesterton. It was not something I set out to do. And everyone always asks me, well Dale, how did you get so interested in G.K. Chesterton? And I said, well, I started reading Chesterton like anybody else on my honeymoon. Because, what else are you going to do on your honeymoon if not read a good book, right? And to make the situation even more interesting, I was a Baptist at the time, and we went to Rome on our honeymoon, as Baptists do so often. And we were there on the day that Pope John Paul II was shot. He went and got shot on our honeymoon. And naturally, I was one of the suspects because I was a Baptist, right? But I had my alibi. I was reading G.K. Chesterton. Because, after all, it was our honeymoon, and we were in Rome, wanted to read a good book. And I had picked up Chesterton because The Everlasting Man was the book that was so instrumental in C.S. Lewis's conversion to Christianity. And I was a big C.S. Lewis fan, and I wanted to say, well, let me get behind and figure out what makes C.S. Lewis tick. And finding out that Chesterton was very, very influential in C.S. Lewis's thought. And I have to tell you that the more I went on to read Chesterton, the more I realized, oh, this is where C.S. Lewis got that. Oh, I finally figured out that it was time to leave junior high and C.S. Lewis and move on. And I tell you, I just have continued to pursue Chesterton. I did, by choosing Chesterton, I chose one of the most prolific authors who ever lived. So I've been reading Chesterton for more than 40 years. I've probably read more than just about anybody has. But if someone tells you, well, I've read all of Chesterton, what you do is you direct them to Monsignor or some other priest, because they need to go to confession. Because there just isn't one out there who's read all of Chesterton. We're still finding things that he wrote. It's just incredible. Most everything he wrote was published. There's never an unpublished thought. But some of it was for just an obscure magazine. So he wrote 100 books. He wrote introductions to 200 more books. He wrote volumes of poetry. His books cover all different subjects, from history to philosophy, theology, social criticism, politics, art criticism. He wrote novels. He wrote plays. He wrote some very famous detective stories. The Father Brown mysteries, where he has a priest as the detective and sort of changed the whole course of detective fiction. Detective fiction is one of the most popular forms of literature there is, and it was what Chesterton most enjoyed reading. And in fact, his Father Brown stories are the thing that has sold the most of everything he's ever written. In fact, they made a series on BBC that's been on for 10 years, the Father Brown mysteries, based on a character with the same name as Father Brown. That's about where the similarity ends. But it is a priest detective, and the priest actually is a good guy, which is, you don't see that much on TV. The priest is a good guy. And what Chesterton did with the Father Brown stories, he created the underdog detective. When you watch most detective shows like CSI, for instance, those guys are all just dweebs, right? They're way too smart. They all figure, oh yes, this type of seaweed only exists in 3 parts of the Pacific Ocean, because everybody knows that, right? Well, when Chesterton was writing the first Father Brown stories, all detective fiction was one of 2 kinds. It was either Sherlock Holmes or bad imitations of Sherlock Holmes, because they always involved the super sleuth, the guy who's like a CSI dweeb, who just knows way too much, and here's someone walking in the next room and figured out that one of his parents is obviously from Lithuania, based on his age. And so Chesterton's Father Brown doesn't seem like he's up to the task. He seems overmatched right away. He's just this humble, quiet little priest, and everyone's expecting, the big super detective to come in and solve it. But he does it by just noticing something that no one else notices. And a great detective story, when it reaches the conclusion, it should do this at the end. When you watch a great mystery movie, when they reveal the solution, you should go, oh, because you know it's right. You saw the clue, but you missed it. You missed it, and the truth was staring you in the face the whole time, but you missed it. And the great pleasure is to feel stupid and smart at the same time. Chesterton says detective fiction is the only literature that is satisfying when it makes us feel stupid. Because we should have gotten it, but we didn't. And yet there's this great pleasure in seeing the truth when we've been looking at it the whole time. Chesterton's great strength as a writer is that he shocks you with what you already know. He shocks you with what you already know. When you're reading Chesterton, he will reveal this common sense, and you go, oh yeah, well yeah, that's right, I just never thought of it that way before, but that's right. And most of our modern thinking is as confusing and as anti-common sense as there is. There's a lot of strange ideas floating around in society because they are pushed by thinkers who really are against common sense, who are against normal thinking. And they've gotten off on strange ideas that are just not connected to reality. Chesterton says the most difficult thing to describe is the obvious. The most difficult thing to describe is the obvious. Because people aren't noticing it, they aren't seeing it. Chesterton says, just to look at the world each day and try to look at it as if you're seeing it for the first time, as if you're looking out on the first day of creation. That's the right perspective to have of everything. To see it as if you're seeing it for the first time. Now, I just want to tell you a little bit more about his career. Chesterton wrote all those books and everything, but he was primarily a journalist, and he primarily wrote for the newspapers. In fact, one of the reasons why Chesterton sort of disappeared from the public eye, disappeared from the colleges and universities, because he was, during his lifetime, one of the most famous writers in the world. Everybody knew who Chesterton was. But why did he go into such an eclipse? Why did he disappear? And the answer is, when he died, he stopped writing. It's probably the worst career move. But the reason why everybody knew who he was is because he wrote mostly for the newspapers. His books were, continued to survive, and that's how people rediscovered him, was through his books. But he was someone that people would open up the newspaper and there'd be an article by Chesterton, or just Chesterton would be quoted as from a speech he just gave or something. So a very familiar figure. He toured the U.S. twice and was, packed out every house that he ever lectured in while he was in the United States. And what state are we in? Kansas? Yeah. I don't know if he ever came to Kansas. He was in St. Louis, though. Yeah, sorry. And so he wrote at least 8,000 essays, literary essays. 8,000. So now, I know you're all going to go back to your writing places after this and write an essay, right? Everybody's going to go home today after this talk and write an essay. I've already given you more than enough material to write one essay. All right? So then tomorrow, write another essay. Okay, so then you'll have written 2 essays, okay? You see how it works? So you write one today, you write one tomorrow, that's 2 essays. So if you keep doing that every day without taking Sundays off, it'll take you 22 years to write 8,000 essays. And then you can start in on your books, your mystery stories, and that book on Thomas Aquinas that you've been wanting to write. So just an incredible prolific output from just a mountain of material. And he did this in 36 years, basically. He wrote from 1900 to 1936 till his death. And And one of the things he could do was that he could write 2 essays at one time. He could write 2 essays at one time. He could write one out longhand and dictate an entirely different essay to his secretary at the same time. So he's writing 2 essays at once. So you see, that would cut your writing time in half. You could talk one into your phone while you're writing the other one. You'd probably hook up your phone and talk into it there and type the other one at the same time. But you see, that cuts your writing time in half, and pretty soon you just have to start working 1 day a week. You know, like a priest, right? And the thing is, all of it's good. It's all profoundly insightful. He can turn a phrase just beautifully. He's just a beautiful writer. You know, he has things such as, it's obvious that truth is stranger than fiction because we have made fiction to suit ourselves. So truth is always going to be stranger than fiction. He said, men will not disagree about what is evil. They'll just disagree about which evils are excusable. Or the Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It's been found difficult and left untried. Or the Bible tells us to love our neighbors and to love our enemies, generally because they're the same person. Or here's one to put on a bumper sticker. If there were no God, there would be no atheists. Oh yeah, that's right. Because God created atheists, so if he wasn't there to create them, there wouldn't be any. I mean, atheists don't like that. It's one of the things they don't like about God. In fact, atheists, Testament says, are the ones who are thinking about God more than anybody else. Because at every opportunity they say, well, there can't be a God, so there must be some other explanation here. And then, of course, his line, angels fly because they take themselves lightly. Beautiful. And the other thing about Chesterton is that the guy who wrote all these perfect lines and was such a deep thinker was completely absent-minded. He was so focused on what he was writing next that he just didn't think about those other things in life. He said, to be absent-minded is simply to be present-minded about something else. So this is the guy who, in the days before cell phones, got off a train and went to a telegraph station and sent a telegram to his wife. M at Market Harbor, where ought I to be? Once got into a taxi cab and told the taxi cab the address of where he was going. It was across the street. It was on the other side of the street. And he once got into a taxi cab to go to his own office, GK's Weekly, where he was the editor of the newspaper. Didn't know the address of his own office. The taxi had to stop at a newspaper stand and get a copy of the newspaper to get the address. Yeah. And of course, getting out of the taxi cab was the next great adventure. Because Chester was very large. He was 300 pounds and 6'3" or 4". And one story has the cab driver struggling to help Chesterton get out of the cab. He said, perhaps if you get out sideways, Mr. Chesterton. He said, I have no sideways. But he said he was the politest man in all of England because he could stand up on a bus and offer his seat to 3 women at one time. So this was a joyful man. Now, I'm going to try to sum up Chesterton for you in 2 main thoughts. Brady does it in three main ideas. I'm going to reduce the number 3 to 2. So one of them is the same as what he has in the book. The other 2 I've combined into 1. All right. Brady has it as the 3 things are romance, story, and paradox. Those are the 3 ways. If you understand those 3 concepts, you understand Chesterton. That's how Chesterton works. Okay. Well, what I've done is I've combined romance and story into wonder. Wonder. Because if you could understand the concept of wonder, that is Chesterton. And if you could understand the concept of paradox, that is Chesterton. So as briefly as possible, I want to go through those two ideas with you, and I'll be happy to take some questions. So when we say wonder, wonder is the state that our minds should be in when we confront the universe. This is something that we could not have created or imagined on our own. God's goodness, his creation, is overwhelming. Life itself is this gift that we've been given, that we have, there's no way you can repay God for giving you the gift of existence itself. And so the proper response is gratitude, thankfulness. And Chesterton says that the least grain of dust has never been praised enough. He said the world will never starve for want of wonder, or wonders rather. It will never starve for want of wonders. It'll only starve for want of wonder. That the way we react and confront the world is what makes life beautiful and worth living. We can have all kinds of awful things happen to us, but we still, none of that matches the goodness that God has given us by giving us existence itself. And to have the idea, at the Mass we hear the priest say, we do well always and everywhere to give you thanks. Always and everywhere. If we really did that, if we were always thankful, everywhere thankful, we wouldn't get upset by the things that happen to us. We wouldn't get angry. We wouldn't get impatient, because we remember that thanks comes first. Thanks comes first. And Chesterton was a master of that. And he always had this great attitude of thankfulness. He says thanks is the highest form of thought. That's why the word Eucharist means thanks. We start with thanks. Start with this sense of awe. And that helps us study anything. If we're studying science, or we're studying nursing, whatever we're studying, if we go into it with a sense of wonder at what we're learning, we're going to absorb it much deeper. All right. The other one, paradox. So, paradox has two meanings. One is the literal meaning that's against our expectation. It's a truth that goes against what we are expecting. But it also tends to mean when two truths are both true, but they seem to contradict each other. If you want some good examples of paradox, there's a book, I can't remember the name of it, but it has some great examples of paradox. Some of them are such as the first will be last and the last will be first. If you lay down your life, you'll save it. But if you try to keep your life, you'll lose it. I can't think of the name of the book. The humble will be exalted. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the poor. Oh yeah, that's what I would have said. The dead shall rise. A virgin shall give birth. Those are paradoxes. I'll recommend the book as soon as I can think of it. But if you want some really good paradoxes, open any Chesterton book. And Grady will cover the paradoxes very well in this book. But Chesterton says the self is more distant than any star. The self is more distant than any star. The biggest mystery is right here. And he said, you can always be blind to a thing as long as it is big enough. And he says, if we worship health, we'll become unhealthy. If we worship nature, we'll become unnatural. If we worship man, we'll become unmanly. He says what's another good one? He talks about the fairy tales. That the fairy tales are, all the moral lessons from fairy tales are paradoxes. The humble shall be exalted. That's Cinderella, right? Jack and the Beanstalk is about the paradox of courage, that you have to be afraid of a thing in order to face it. That's what bravery is to actually confront the thing you're afraid of. Beauty and the Beast is the paradox of love, that you have to love a thing first and then make it lovable afterwards. So those are the keys. Wonder and paradox. You're going to go through, Brady breaks up to romance, to story. Those are going to be, he has a wonderful way of explaining these in the book, but he really deals with paradox well. Wonder and paradox. One of those is pretty easy to understand. The other is a little more complicated. Which one's the complicated one? Which one's the complicated one? No. Because that's what you were expected to say. Paradox is the complicated one. Because it sounded complicated at first, but once you get it down, oh yeah, life is unexpected. There's contradictions apparently working. Great free will and fate. The only way we can understand free will and fate to make any sense is to accept both of them, even if they contradict each other. Because if there is no all-powerful God, why would you believe in an all-powerful God who isn't powerful? But why would you worship a God why would you worship a God if he doesn't allow you free will, right? Why would you do anything if you don't have free will? Why are you sitting here now if you don't have free will? It's because my grade depends on it. Yeah. But yeah, we have to have free will. It's the only way we can make sense out of our own actions. But we have to have an all-powerful God, because if there's no ultimate meaning to the world, also our actions don't make any sense. So if we think about that enough, yeah, paradox is really a key to understanding. So it's not that difficult at all. You have to accept paradox in order to get through each day. But you know what's hard? Is maintaining a sense of wonder all day long. That's a real challenge. And that's the difficult one. All right. I'll be happy to take a few questions now as we revive our thinking now. Let's get our screws turning again here. What do you have any questions about Chesterton or about anything else? Yes?
Based upon your study of Chesterton and his life, can you speak a little bit more about his own conversion, his own process, and how he arrived at that moment in his life, and why it took so long?
Yeah, sure. I did mention that I was a Baptist on my honeymoon. It was not a condition I was able to maintain. I've been trying to maintain the honeymoon for some 44 years, but I wasn't able to maintain being a Baptist. It was Chester that brought me to the Catholic Church. But Chester himself was a convert. And he describes really 3 stages of conversion. The first stage is you decide you're not going to believe everything you've heard about the Catholic Church. You're going to try to be fair to the Catholic Church. But he says there is no being fair to the Catholic Church. Either you're for it or against it. No one's neutral about it. And as soon as they stop being against it, suddenly they find themselves rooting for it. They're already for it. So the first step of trying to be fair to the Catholic Church is fatal. Second step is simply discovering the Catholic Church, just learning all the things about the faith that you never knew. And that's the fun part, because it's like being in this foreign country with all these exotic animals that you didn't even know existed, and you're just taking it all in, and of course you can leave anytime you want. There's no commitment involved. That's the fun stage. But then comes the third stage. Running away from the Catholic Church. Realizing that all of your intellectual arguments have been answered, but it's still your free will that is involved. You have to actually make the decision. And everything in your being is telling you, don't do it, because your life will totally change. If you become Catholic, it won't be the same anymore. Get out now while you still can. And there's just, at some point, something happens and you realize there is nowhere else to go. And Chesterton says when the convert enters the church, he has to do it with his head bowed because it's an act of humility. You have to admit that you were wrong. And he says what you discover when you enter the church is that the church is larger on the inside than it is on the outside. That's a paradox. And Chesterton himself was asked, well, why did you become Catholic? He said, to get rid of my sins. Only the Catholic Church can do that. When a man walks out of the confessional, he's 5 minutes old, and his whole life just started over again. Only the Catholic Church can do that. What else? Yes?
Yeah, I was wondering, all the wonderful literary gifts that Chesterton left us, what do you think Chesterton would have thought about AI and using AI to generate literary contributions?
Well, I can't tell you what Chesterton would have said, but I can tell you what he did say. He warned against everything that prevents us from doing our own thinking. He says thinking is hard work. In fact, thinking is the hardest work there is, and most people would rather not do it. So he's already prophesied what the problem is going to be. It's going to be an act of great laziness to give up and let something else do our thinking for us. But we, as a society, have already done that for quite a while. People are not thinking for themselves. They're not doing anything for themselves. And we'd rather have someone else fight for us, someone else entertain us, someone else think for us, and someone else rule us. Chesterton defends democracy, he defends local craftsmanship, and he defends the family as really the center of society. And democracy only works that way. And of course, he defends thinking for yourself. Yes?
What would you say is the solution for that? Of we've gone so far with not thinking for ourselves. What would you say is kind of the solution towards getting back to thinking?
Well, the solution is starting right here in this room. All of the ways we solve our modern problems have to start at the local level. There's going to be no top-down solutions, no policy changes that are going to just make everything okay again. So we start by doing it for ourselves, a tendency against a tendency, just change our own behavior a little bit rather than not doing anything about it, and slowly we start turning the ship. But the revival that we need to change the course of our society right now has to be a grassroots revival. And so it starts with each one of us. But then, as it starts with each of us, we start as a community then, and then it has this ripple effect going outside. But we start by doing the right thing, and when the right thing is being done by enough people, things change. Yes?
Could you tell us a bit about Chesterton's influences, like who he was reading and engaging with that formed his thought?
Sure. So the writer that influenced him the most was Charles Dickens. And I think that's why Brady understands the importance of story and romance. The characters in Dickens are so real, and they just come to life. But Chesterton says that he celebrates the common person, Dickens does, and he's this true democratic writer. And so he made Chesterton look at the man in the street, where all the great thinkers are trying, how can we fix things from the top? And that's part of it. And then also great English literature. Those are the most, it wasn't great theologians that influenced him. He talks about how he became a Christian in orthodoxy. He said it was reading the opponents of Christianity that convinced him to be a Christian. Because all the arguments against Christianity were really bad, and they represented bad thinking. So that's kind of a paradox, isn't it? It was the opponents of Christianity that convinced him that Christianity was true. It's a paradox, right? Yeah. But then, of course, the influences that he had. I mentioned C.S. Lewis. Just a gigantic effect on C.S. Lewis, but also on people like Tolkien. Archbishop Fulton Sheen was heavily influenced. He wrote his first book partly on Chesterton's philosophy, but he asked Chesterton to write the introduction to his first book, and Chesterton did. Yeah. So he has a ripple effect on both art and thinking, throughout the 20th century. Yes?
Could you talk about his influence on Tolkien?
Yeah, so on Tolkien, Chesterton really understood the importance of fantasy fiction and of the imagination. And he truly celebrated that we are godlike creatures in that we can create. That's one of the things that makes us godlike, is that we can create. That's what God does. And so Tolkien just takes that idea right from Chesterton. That's where you get his ideas of sub-creation and all that. And one of the scenes in The Lord of the Rings is really influenced by Chesterton's epic poem, The Ballad of the White Horse. And Tolkien was always trying to get Lewis to become a Catholic, and he'd always use arguments from Chesterton in order to try to convince him. People will often ask, well, why didn't C.S. Lewis become a Catholic? And the answer is from G.K. Chesterton, who didn't even know C.S. Lewis or Tolkien. They never met. They lived, their lives overlapped, but they never met each other. Chesterton writes about a great English artist and writer, William Blake. And he addresses the question, well, was William Blake even a believer? He has such strange ideas about God. And Chesterton says, no, he's seeking the right thing. He said, if every man lived 1,000 years, every man would either be a nihilistic atheist or a member of the Catholic Church. Those are ultimately the two choices. And Blake was on his way in the right direction. He was moving towards the Catholic Church. He just didn't live long enough. And C.S. Lewis was on his way to the Catholic Church. He just didn't live long enough. But because of his writing, people have become Catholic. People start reading Lewis, they graduate to Chesterton, they become Catholic. The great thing about Chesterton's line about William Blake is that he wrote it 10 years before he became a Catholic himself. So he already saw what the two choices were. Yes?
Of his fictional works, besides Father Brown, is there a favorite novel of yours that?
Yeah, my favorite novel of his is called Man Alive. His most famous novel is called The Man Who Was Thursday. It's a great book, full of paradoxes. An inspiration for Mission Impossible, because you have all these people ripping off masks and they turn out to be someone else. But Man Alive is a wonderful story about a wonderful character named Innocent Smith. And that's just one of the great names of any character in modern literature, Innocent Smith. Innocent Smith has been accused of attempted murder, breaking and entry, burglary, multiple abandonments, and these other crimes, and he's guilty of all of them, except that he's innocent. Now, how does that work? Why should I tell you? You should probably read the book. It's got some wonderful twists in it, and there's a line in the book that Chester says, God sends us priests to remind us that someday we will die. But he sends us poets to remind us that we are not dead yet. Oh, the guy in the dark suit back there.
One of Chesterton's most famous paradoxes is the quotation, anything worth doing is worth doing badly.
Yes.
Can you explain that?
Okay. A thing worth doing is worth doing badly. He's taking that from a well-known epigram. Well, a thing worth doing is worth doing well. And that's how we would definitely finish the sentence, right? Well, Chesterton is actually defending the amateur when he says a thing worth doing is worth doing badly. The amateur does things because they love doing it. That's what amateur means, lover. They're not a professional. They're not getting paid for their work. But it's still worth doing because they love it. They may not do it as well as a professional. but it's still worth doing because what they're doing is based on love. The perfect example of the amateur is the mother. The mother is doing what she does because she loves her child. And that is worth doing, even though she may not follow what the books on child raising say, or what the professional daycare people say. It's a great line, often misunderstood. How are we doing? Anything else? Yes.
Well, it's a full of 8,000 essays. How do you choose topics for 8,000 essays?
Well, what I have back there is a book of Chesterton's best essays. And that would be a good place to start. And I think we'll probably come out with a subsequent book, Chesterton's other best essays. And then we'll do, son of Chesterton's best essays. Chesterton's best essays go west. Chesterton's best essays at the circus. All right, but that's a great place to start, just pure Chesterton. And his essays are generally about 1,500 words long, so it's not a lifetime commitment to read one essay. And but he did truly write about everything. There's almost no topic that he didn't have some prophetic reference to.
One of my favorites is the one on what I found in my pocket.
Yeah, what I found in my pocket, yes. He says, when the sea gives up its dead, it won't have as much as what's in my pockets, yes.
My personal favorite is the one on staring at the ceiling.
Yeah, on lying in bed. Yeah, on lying in bed. And he says, lying in bed would be the perfect activity if only one had a colored pencil long enough to reach the ceiling. Now that's a good first line of an essay. I mean, if you want to write an essay, you read a Chesterton essay because this first line usually grabs you and takes you in. And his essays are sort of like mystery stories. They always end with a surprise ending too. Yes?
What do you think Destiny could say about our community, Spanish people?
Our community what?
Spanish people.
Oh, Spanish people. Well, Chesterton is truly a universal writer. You think of him as an Englishman, but he says the universal saints are all local saints too. And the universal writers are local writers, but they're hitting something that everyone can connect to. And Chesterton has a huge following in South America, in Argentina and Brazil. Pope Francis, when he was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, was a huge Chesterton fan. I was expecting him to quote Chesterton more during his pontificate. He only quoted him once that I could find. But so there's these universal qualities that all people can relate to. And but one of the things he talks about, of course, the Hispanic community in the U.S., they are strangers in a strange land, as a way. But Chester argues that we all are strangers in a strange land. We're all looking for our ultimate homeland. And that's the journey of life itself, is to get to our real home. But the thing about the Hispanic community is that they play a part in the solution to our problems, because remember, they all start locally. And the Hispanic community has a natural connection with each other. But you feel that's the strength they have of their connection with the gospel, it can do great work. I think I've already seen it happen when I travel around the country. There's just a fervent faith that the Hispanic community is bringing to the Catholic Church. Yeah. Good question. Yes?
I recently gave my ethics students the assignment based on Mr. Stiller's breakdown of Chesterton's theme of innocence, of childhood innocence to losing that innocence to regaining that innocence. You mentioned innocence, but what does innocence mean, and why do we need to recover? Should we grow up as opposed to becoming like a child again?
It's interesting because I think Chesterton's own life demonstrates it. He started out as truly innocent child. He went through this dark period, very dark period, where he even considered taking his own life. He was so deep in depression. The demons almost pushed him to the edge. He said the only thing that saved him was clinging to one thin thread of thanks. that he realized that existence is better than non-existence. So, I mean, the devil had his eye on G.K. Chesterton. And when he stepped away from that darkness, he really did regain his innocence. And there was this childlike quality to him that, you know, what innocence is it's goodness. And he realized you're only happy in goodness. Man is only happy in goodness. Nothing else will satisfy him. And Chesterton somehow regained that. And the childlike gift of wonder and the childlike love of goodness and justice. He said, children love justice because they're innocent. We older people who are guilty prefer mercy. So, you know, the gospel says, unless we become like little children, we cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. So Chesterton's always trying to give us that innocent, childlike view of the world.
Dale, if I can, since you brought up the Pope, John Paul I, who only lived 33 days as Pope, but had a career before that, loved Chesterton. He was Italian. Can you comment on that, and especially on Ball on the Cross?
Yeah, when he was Archbishop of Venice, he wrote these letters to people in history. And, you know, he wrote a letter to Mark Twain at first. Well, he wrote a letter to G.K. Chesterton, and it was specifically about the Ball on the Cross. And the Ball on the Cross, another great novel. It begins with a floating ship over London, and the two characters in the ship are a monk named Michael and a mad scientist named Professor Lucifer. I don't know who they're supposed to represent. But the Ball on the Cross is sort of all the things that we cover in the Brothers Karamazov. It's this war between good and evil. And, you know, and that's being fought in the soul. And the great advantage that the Ball on the Cross has over the Brothers Karamazov is that it's short, gets to its point about 700 pages quicker than Dostoevsky does, and also it's funny, which, you know, Dostoevsky's still working on that. It's great, but I think what Albino Luciani, Pope Paul I, he was drawn, I think, to the goodness in Chesterton, and to his ability to fight evil with reason, and showing how you know, evil always has bad logic, and goodness is a much easier position to maintain because the logic works. Yes.
Can you speak more on the relationship between Chesterton and Belloc and how they kind of mutually influence each other?
Yeah, so Chesterton's best friend was another great Catholic writer named Hilaire Belloc, and he was, in his personality, everything that Chesterton wasn't. He was a charging bull, and he spoke with a straightforwardness that can be unnerving, and doesn't take fools lightly. Whereas Chesterton, I think, enjoyed fools to a greater degree than Belloc did. So they were definitely, personality-wise and technique-wise, completely different. They just happened to agree on religion and politics, so that's why they were always associated with each other. And of course, they truly defended each other. But Belloc was largely responsible for Chesterton becoming Catholic, and largely responsible for Chesterton's economic and social ideas. But Belloc lived a very tragic life, and Chesterton did not. Belloc lost his wife at an early age. He lost one son in World War I and another son in World War II. He always had a cloud hanging over him, and yet there's this light underneath it that informs. He's just truly a man who loves God and loves his country. Yes.
So more of a practical, less philosophical question. Where many people, you know, were reading the Stillward book this year, but many probably have not read any Chesterton. If we want to go to the source, haven't read any Chesterton, where would you start?
Well, I've got some books back there. So if you want pure Chesterton, there's the book of essays that I have. I also have edited a book called The Story of the Family. It's all Chesterton's writings, but it's all specifically about the family. So it's cut up into smaller essays and smaller quotations and everything. That's a very, I wouldn't recommend, one of his major books to start with. And so Common Sense 101 is also an introductory book to Chesterton. That's a book of me quoting Chesterton. That's how I write. And then I just came out with a brand new book called I Also Had My Hour. It's the alternative autobiography of G.K. Chesterton, where it's a retelling of his life, but in his own words that I've put together after many years of research. But I would recommend either Common Sense 101 or The Story of the Family or his book of essays back there. Yeah. Yes?
With all the difficulties that we're facing in society today, what advice do you think Chesterton would give this society?
Yeah, well, his advice is going to be pretty close to what Jesus said. Love God and love your neighbor. He said, if you do those two things, everything else does fall into line. But Chester was always thinking about God. He was always thinking about God. So he's pointing to the eternal in everything he writes. And yet he wrote for a secular audience, and he was a secular individual. And we just have to start bringing God back into community life again. If we don't do that, there's really no hope for us. There's no secular solutions at all. But we do it by the way we treat other people. And if we have, Chesterton brought me to the Catholic faith. What drew me to him, it was certainly his great arguments at the beginning, but then ultimately it was his goodness that drew me to him. He has this positive way of dealing with things. And that's what we all have to do, is treat the truth as a way of inviting people and welcoming people with the truth. Thank you very much for your kind attention.